So I will be talking to you a little bit about ESG, but I think as we start off, from my perspective at least, ESG would probably mean very different things for different organizations, depending on the sector that you work in, depending on your, for us as HYPHEN, it means something very specific, considering the phase of development that we're in. And so I think that's my first caveat. So, and I think a little bit of indulgence as I go into my first slide, because that's intended to really lay the foundation of what ESG is. And we may have varying levels of understanding and expertise around the subject, so bear with me and bear with the rest of the group, for those that are just starting out in the sector, of us just walking through a little bit what it means. And then I'd like to dive into the project and explain to you a little bit about how we are looking at the respective elements, so specifically environmental, how we're approaching our social responsibility requirements, and some hints to governance, which are not fully implemented yet, but purely because of the phase that we're in as the HYPHEN project. I love these two ladies there, I'm not going to do this. I will be listening to them when I lose my train of thought. Okay, so here we go. So in a nutshell, ESG obviously stands for environment, social, and governance. But what it means is, it's really a set of criteria that begins to define a framework where organizations are required to then measure their performance and measure their impact against. And when we talk about measuring performance, is when you have now implemented certain policies, is to see how effectively are you doing that. So if we talk about environmental performance, we may look at to what extent is the organization looking at maybe waste management, to what extent is it minimizing its footprint, if it's an infrastructure project, etc., from an environmental perspective. When we talk about impact, it's really about your real world effect that you have, that your organization's activities and decisions have on, for instance, the environment, or if you take an example of social contributions or social impact or effect, we may ask, what contribution is that entity making to job creation or just upliftment of communities and people? So performance really and impact, that's what we're trying to measure when we look at the different ESG criteria. So considering that it's measurement of performance and impact, there is a great focus on monitoring and reporting. Now, I'm not going to go into the different reporting frameworks. There are numerous reporting frameworks. I've mentioned a few, and I have some other information for those who are interested, but I think a general Google search will help you out. The GRI is probably one of the most widely adopted frameworks. And I don't think that should be the focus of the discussion. I think it's sufficient for this purpose to know that there are various reporting frameworks, and they're adopted by various institutions based on specifically what they offer for the organization and their ultimately sustainability goals. So, bringing it to the boardroom then, if you have ESG criteria, what it effectively is you begin as the board to look at risk and compliance around those topics. And when you talk about risk, what ESG, and a lot of people are saying, if you talk to different ESG professionals, they say, well, ESG should be ESG, because there is the economy in ESG. And my view is the economy is the cornerstone, it is the center, it is why we do business, right? So that's the economy. And so ESG factors come in and they apply from a risk perspective. The question to organizations and management and the board is, to what extent are you incorporating ESG criteria in your decision making? Is environment, social, and governance beginning to play relatively the same, enjoy relatively the same level or degree of importance as the economy does, your economic outflows or your financials? And so that's really the point around risk. So it's implementing metrics and measures that allows the board to give relative similar weighting to these different criteria. And it's not equal weighting. It is a balancing act, and I think that's the entire point of ESG. But it's saying that they have a role to play. And from a compliance perspective, there are various international standards, regulations, that depending again on the sector that you're in, the market that you want to play in. Is that thing that is left? Oh no, okay. Or the sector that you want to play in, etc. That will tell you what compliance, is about. So that monitoring and reporting is around making sure if you are, in the case of HYPHEN, operating in a very environmentally sensitive environment, IOC performance standard 6 on biodiversity is going to be key, making sure that we are in compliance with that. So, the long and short of it though is we have these criteria, but ultimately the point is that the whole emergence of ESG are around us as the globe collectively moving to achieving some sustainability, right? So, sustainability, the ultimate framework, is the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. So the world will come together and say, we have various challenges from hunger, health, environmental, etc., and how do we collectively come together? So that is ultimately, when we talk about ESG and how it affects an organization, the question is actually how are you contributing to the sustainable development of the world in considering those additional criteria. And so it's important to know that ESG, and because it's sustainability, these are aspirational goals. So there is no jail time if you don't meet them. But there are significant consequences to organizations who ignore the emergence and the development of the world in this direction. And I've listed them, so I won't read because I'm almost out of time. But I suppose I wanted to highlight those three things. Why is ESG important? Particularly in the context of Namibia. We're a natural resource-rich country, and how we manage the implementation or the exploitation of natural resources is critically important. So as a country, that's really, really important for us to focus on. From a HYPHEN and a green hydrogen perspective and government strategy around green hydrogen development, we have such a major opportunity as Namibia already because we have environmental protections included in our constitution to show the world, be a leader in what sustainable development looks like as the world tries to decarbonize. So our contribution as Namibia in terms of defining sustainability and environmental protections, because if you look at, and I'm getting excited, but if you look at our coastline, the 1,500 kilometers of coastline, all of it is predominantly within national parks. And the three green hydrogen valleys that government have identified are all along this coastline. Chevening at the top, the Rongo, bottom of the Drupa in the middle, and down south, the South National Park. In order to achieve net zero by 2050, the world needs to implement roughly 20 over the next 5 years, 9,000 projects the size of HYPHEN. So you can imagine the land requirement that is needed globally to implement and to achieve that. It's a very linear comparison, but that's just to give you an idea. So in terms of sustainable development, defining what it means to implement projects in relatively sensitive areas, HYPHEN, together with government, and government, I think, of Namibia, has the opportunity to really be a leader in defining what that means. Okay, very, very briefly, this is the HYPHEN project. You see there the little bridge on the left, that is the South National Park, that is what we call the Old Stratford area, and that is the government that is also known as the Southern Corridor Development Initiative. That's the first green hydrogen valley. And that's where HYPHEN has been allocated 2 land parcels, referred to as Dolphin and Springbok, 4,000 kilometers in size. Those 2 land parcels will be leased to HYPHEN for a 40-year period. But in our feasibility and implementation agreement, there are various milestones under that contract that we need to achieve, so it's not only 30 to 40 years. It's feasibility, if we prove feasibility of the project over the next 2 years, government agrees that it's feasible, and we have various criteria, including environmental and social compliance that we need to, certain targets that we need to reach, apart from all of the other stuff. Then we go into a construction period of 4 years and then a potentially 40-year operational period. So that is a lease. Besides, the remaining balance of the Southern Cape can accommodate, well, I don't know, can accommodate at least 10 projects the size of HYPHEN, so really, in terms of unlocking the green hydrogen sector, this first valley is a significant opportunity for the country. Ours is a green hydrogen project that looks to take green hydrogen, produce ammonia, and export that. We can talk about, for those who are interested, a little bit more about all of that in a minute. But I need to rush. This is our HYPHEN project. Okay, I'm not going to tell you. Somebody said no.
Tony,
Yes.
let's take an extra 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you guys know, just maybe there are people who still don't know what green hydrogen is?
Yes.
Can I just quickly?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So this slide is an oversimplification of the project. The 3 columns represent the geographical locations of where our infrastructure will be built. So the SBI talks about the land parcel that's in the park. In between is all the infrastructure will connect the assets in the park to what will be in the rivers. So basically, if you start at the bottom there, you see the different lines. Oh. Sorry. Tell me better. Wow. Anyhow. Technical support. Sorry, guys. Okay, well, this is. There we go. Okay, now I know what it says. No? All right, let me just. Let me just explain to you what. And how gently. Okay. Right. So the yellow lines represent the flow of power, that's renewable energy power. Blue, obviously, the water, and the green is the green flow of green hydrogen, and then the purple is the flow of ammonia. So if you start at the bottom, you'll see we have the desalination plant, and you'll see the yellow lines. It's a pretty integrated kind of island project. So we will be powering with the generation, with the wind and solar that will be generating, will be powering the desalination as well. So you basically take seawater, you put it through the desalination, it's oversimplifications. You demineralize it, you have all the salt and the minerals, now you have relatively clean water. We pump that 70 to 80 kilometers into the park where the electrolyzer is sit. The electrolyzer is a very sophisticated piece of technology that basically takes the water and you take the renewable energy that the power and you put an electric current through the water. When you do that, it splits the water into hydrogen and oxygen. Release the oxygen, we capture the hydrogen gas, we pipe that back into that 70, 80 kilometer pipeline to the coast. At the coast there is another piece of technology, an air separation unit. It takes nitrogen out of the air, it combines it with the hydrogen gas, and we produce ammonia in another piece of the ammonia synthesis facility. And then we take that liquid ammonia and we export that. So in a nutshell, that's what it is. This is from the house, which is fantastic. All right. I'm just going to, this is the high-level timeline for the HYPHEN project. The first line is important because it speaks to our environmental process, which basically relates or links back to our discussion today. HYPHEN only has environmental clearance for the installation of LED masts, and the LED masts are just really tall towers with specialized sensors to measure the resource, so the wind, the wind and the sun. So we'll be looking at how the wind behaves, how high does it blow, how fast does it, etc. And that's basically to design our turbines according to the conditions there. So that's what's happening at the moment. The ESIA is our full environmental and social impact assessment. That will only kick off next year. The contract is not yet effective. We are in what we're calling a preliminary period, which is the first 6 months. It will become effective toward the end of the year, and also provided that we've achieved all of the different milestones that were intended to be achieved during the preliminary period. Then we go into 2-year feasibility. And so all of the engagements around environmental compliance and engagements with communities and grievance mechanisms that we need to have in place to try and resolve concerns, issues, conflicts that community members and others may have around the project, all of that will basically run over the next 2 years from kind of early 2024 for a 2-year period. Important to note, because we are early phase, what we've done as HYPHEN is done an initial environmental and social screening report. I'll only talk about some of the environmental approaches that we've identified. So the first thing is we've looked at, because this is a biodiversity hotspot, what are the areas that necessarily we have to stay away from that are more sensitive from environmental perspective. So you may know, depending on your background, that obviously closer to the shoreline, you have fog coming in. That means there's more water and more opportunity for plants to grow along the coastline. So closest to your coastline, you basically avoid that entirely. You would also avoid kind of high-lying areas. We're now doing assessments for bird, and typically in some cases you would also do bird and bat migration. They fly in a particular path, typically on a particular path, and so ultimately the location of your wind turbines, basically you can design around flight paths of birds and so on. So there are various ways in which various studies, particularly scientific studies that we have to undertake over the next 2 years, that have already done some indicative planning around identifying where are these kind of key areas to avoid. And so at this stage, although we have a project, the 2 sites are 4,000 kilometers in size, as I've indicated, the indicative design at this stage looks at only implementing or using about 10% of that land area. And then what I can then just say on a social perspective, as a concluding standing up. As a concluding remark is, HYPHEN has also taken great care in looking at the social component. Government initially asked in the RFP for corporate social, asked us what our contribution to corporate social impact would be, and those were 2 requirements around fiscal, but also specifically socio-economic developments around employment and procurement. What we've done together with government is extended the framework quite significantly to add these additional elements. So we said we are cognizant that Namibia doesn't have the skills or the skilled professionals yet, or sufficient companies to be able to provide what we need. And therefore, in order for us not to give lip service to the idea of maximizing the participation on the project, what we have to do is introduce capacity building elements, so training for people and enterprise supply development for companies. And so we've ended up with a very broad framework that intends to address the social that is under ESG. And there's a lot to be said about it, but effectively, I think that's probably my time. Maybe in the Q&A we can get a little bit more. Thank you for your indulgence and your time.